people did see yesterday, whatever the cause in the Commons, was a Prime Minister, a Chancellor clearly under enormous pressure. Do you worry that this is becoming too much pressure for your Chancellor?
No, I have every faith in my Chancellor. She has made incredibly important decisions in the last 12 months, and we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today without those important decisions. We work in lockstep.
The Hidden Hand, how Labour Together created and may destroy Keir Starmer. Right. Before we dive into what might be the most damaging scandal to hit Downing Street since Boris Johnson's lockdown parties, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be notified when the next bombshell drops in British politics, because at this rate, we're getting one every bloody week. Now then, picture this scene if you will. It's 2019. The Labour Party is in absolute shambles under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and somewhere in a Westminster office, a group of so-called moderates are plotting their next move like characters from a political thriller. These weren't your average party activists, mind you. These were the puppet masters, the kingmakers, the people who decide who gets to play Prime Minister and who gets consigned to the political wilderness. Their organisation, Labour Together. Their chosen candidate, one Keir Starmer. Their fatal mistake, thinking they could keep their grubby fingerprints off the whole operation forever. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating, and frankly rather sinister. What we're witnessing now isn't just another Westminster expenses scandal or another politician caught with their hand in the till. No, this is a slow-motion political assassination of a Prime Minister by the very people who put him in number 10 in the first place. It's like watching Frankenstein's monster turn on a creator, except the monster is wearing a rather expensive suit, and the creator is a think tank with the transparency of a brick wall. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Because this story reads like a masterclass in political machination. Labour Together didn't spring from nowhere in 2015. Originally called Common Good Labour, it was a brainchild of people who looked at Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and thought, right, we need to do something about this socialist nonsense before it ruins everything we've worked for. These weren't naive idealists. These were seasoned operators who understood that in modern politics, you don't just hope for the best candidate to emerge naturally. You manufacture them. The key players in this drama read like a who's who of New Labour's greatest hits. We've got Morgan McSweeney, now Starmer's chief of staff, pulling strings like a political Svengali. There's Steve Reed, currently Housing Secretary, working behind the scenes to keep Labour afloat during the Corbyn years while simultaneously planning for his downfall. These weren't rebels working from the margins. These were insiders with access, influence, and most importantly, money. Lots and lots of money. Here's where it gets properly juicy. According to a new book by Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogron called Get In, Labour Together spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on YouGov polling between 2016 and 2019. Now, polling isn't cheap, and when you're conducting it on that scale, you're not just satisfying curiosity about voting intentions. You're conducting market research for a product, and that product was Keir Starmer's political career. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no. The book also suggests that Labour Together provided Starmer with a speechwriter for his inaugural address as Labour leader. Think about that for a moment. The man who would become Prime Minister, delivering what should have been his most personal and authentic moment as party leader, was potentially reading words written by someone else's hired pen. It's rather like discovering that Shakespeare had a team of ghostwriters, except Shakespeare wasn't running the country. Now, here's where Sir Keir finds himself in a rather sticky wicket. Parliamentary rules are crystal clear about this sort of thing. Any support worth more than £1,500 must be declared in the Register of Members' Financial Interests. This isn't some obscure technicality buried in the small print. This is fundamental transparency that allows the public to know who might be influencing their elected representatives. Whether it's a single large contribution or multiple gifts from the same donor totaling over £500 in a year, it all needs to be declared. The Conservatives, sensing blood in the water like sharks at feeding time, have written to Parliamentary Standards Commissioner Daniel Greenberg demanding a full investigation. Conservative Chairman Kevin Hollinrake has laid it out in black and white. Between January and April 2020, during Labour's leadership election, Starmer allegedly received polling in council potentially worth thousands of pounds from Labour Together. Yet when you look at his register of members' interest for that period, there's absolutely nothing declared. It's as if these contributions simply vanish into thin air. or perhaps more accurately, were deliberately kept in the shadows. This isn't Labour Together's first brush with regulatory authorities either. In 2021, they were fined £14,250 for failing to declare around £740,000 in donations. The Electoral Commission found over 20 breaches of electoral law and determined that the violations were inexcusable. 20 breaches. That's not an administrative oversight. That's a pattern of behavior that suggests a fundamental disregard for the rules that govern our democratic processes. But here's the really delicious irony in all of this. Keir Starmer, the man who positioned himself as Mr. Clean, the forensic former director of public prosecutions who would restore integrity to British politics after the chaos of the Johnson years, is now facing questions about his own transparency and honesty. The man who spent years criticizing conservative sleaze and demanding higher standards is discovering that when you live in a glass house, you probably shouldn't throw stones. What makes this particularly damaging for Starmer isn't just a potential rule-breaking, though that's serious enough. It's what this reveals about the fundamental nature of his leadership. Unlike Tony Blair, who created New Labour through his own political vision and charisma, or Margaret Thatcher, who shaped conservative ideology through force of personality and conviction, Starmer was essentially a manufactured candidate. He was selected, groomed, and promoted by a think tank that operated more like a political consultancy than a grassroots movement. This explains so much about his current struggles as Prime Minister. When you're placed in position by others rather than owning it through your own political journey, you tend to remain dependent on those same puppet masters. It's why Morgan McSweeney wields such influence in Downing Street, why the government often seems to lack clear direction, and why Starmer frequently appears more comfortable reciting talking points than articulating genuine political conviction. The timing of this scandal couldn't be worse for Labour. Coming hot on the heels of Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner's problems with unpaid stamp duty, it creates a pattern of ethical questions that threatens to undermine the government's credibility. Remember, Labour won the last election partly by positioning themselves as a clean alternative to conservative corruption and chaos. If that moral authority evaporates, what exactly do they have left to offer? Kevin Hollinrake hasn't minced words about what he sees as the significance of this scandal. He has called it yet another Downing Street cover-up and argued that it strikes at the heart of the Prime Minister's judgment and integrity. These aren't the sort of accusations that simply fade away with a non-apology and a promise to do better. These are the kind of allegations that, if proven, could fundamentally damage a politician's reputation for trustworthiness. What particularly telling is Labour Together's response to these revelations, or rather, their lack of response. For an organization that helped create a prime minister, they've been remarkably quiet about defending their chosen candidate. It's almost as if they are distancing themselves from their own creation, watching from the sidelines as a political Frankenstein they assemble begins to lumber towards his own destruction. The broader implications of this scandal extend far beyond Keir Starmer's personal political survival. If the allegations are proven, it raises fundamental questions about how modern British politics actually works. Are our political leaders genuinely representing the will of the people, or are they essentially products manufactured by well-funded think tanks and special interest groups? When voters choose a candidate, are they selecting someone with authentic political beliefs, or are they simply picking between different brands of political consultancy? This connects to a larger crisis of trust in British democracy. Voters already feel disconnected from Westminster, already suspect that politicians are more interested in serving powerful interests than representing ordinary people. A scandal that reveals the extent to which a prime minister was essentially created by a secretive organization with questionable transparency practices only reinforces these suspicions. The investigation by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner will be crucial. If Greenberg finds that Starmer did indeed fail to properly declare support from Labour Together, it won't just be an administrative violation. It will be proof that the man who promised to clean up British politics was himself operating in the shadows from the very beginning of his leadership campaign. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this entire affair isn't the potential rule-breaking, serious as that may be. It's a revelation of just how hollow Keir Starmer's political persona really is. Here's a man who was selected, manufactured, and promoted by others, reading speeches potentially written by someone else, making decisions influenced by private polling he didn't pay for, all while presenting himself as an authentic political voice with genuine convictions. The puppet masters at Labour Together may have been clever enough to get their chosen candidate into Downing Street, but they weren't clever enough to cover their tracks. Now, as the investigation unfolds and more details emerge, they may well discover that creating a prime minister is considerably easier than keeping one in power when the public learns how the sausage was really made. This story is far from over. Parliamentary investigations move slowly but thoroughly, and if there's one thing we've learned from recent political scandals, it's that the cover-up is often worse than the original crime. As more details emerge about the relationship between Starmer and Labour Together, as more questions are asked about undeclared support and hidden influence, the Prime Minister may find that the very people who lifted him to power have become the architects of his potential downfall. The next few months will be crucial for Keir Starmer's political survival. Can he weather this storm and maintain his position, or will the hidden hand that created him ultimately destroy him? In British politics, as in life, what goes around tends to come around, and those who live by political manipulation often die by it as well. One thing's for certain, though. This scandal is all the ingredients of a proper British political drama, complete with secret organizations, hidden money, and the slow unraveling of carefully constructed public personas. It's the sort of story that reminds us why keeping a close eye on Westminster is more important than ever, because when the powerful stop following the rules that govern the rest of us, democracy itself begins to fray at the edges. So there you have it, the tale of how a think tank created a prime minister and may now destroy him. Subscribe to UK Connors because this story is nowhere near finished, and when the next chapter unfolds, you'll want to be first to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole really goes.